Twister Talk with Gary, Sue, and Brandon starts now.
Right in front of us is tearing something apart right now. Big power flash. Shoot, I think a semi got flipped. Are you okay? This is great. Hey, there's big rail cover. We gotta go, sir. Hey, get the cut.
I hate Oklahoma.
Everybody says that once in a while. It's Twister Talk. I'm Gary.
I'm Sue.
I'm Brandon.
And we're all back together with the show. And we've got a great interview today.
Yeah.
We got a great interview. We have. I've been looking forward to this for a couple of weeks now. And we didn't have to go far for this one. We actually almost around the block for us in Ohio. And so we want to introduce Dr. Jana Hauser, who is Director of Undergraduate Studies, Associate Professor of Meteorology at The Ohio State University. Jana, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Like I said, you have you've done a lot of research over the years, and we're going to talk about your background a bit because you've chased with the guy that most people consider one of the great science gurus of chasing.
Howie Bluestein.
Wow.
Bluestein.
Do you get to call him Howie?
Yeah.
I do call him Howie. Yeah.
That's awesome.
and my daughter lovingly calls him Uncle Howie.
Uncle Howie. All right.
Uncle Howie.
All right. Well, we'll get into that in a little bit because that's going to be a lot of fun. Because if you've read the books or seen them on those great weather documentaries back in the 80s, 90s, and everything, they're chasing everything that moves. That was a lot of fun. I think that cloud's doing that. No, that cloud's doing that. No, the one behind us is the one. Run. So anyway, so we're going to jump into this, and again, like I said, you are just checking here. I got to get the okay. Like I said, you're Director of Undergraduate Studies at the Department of Geography at The Ohio State University. Brandon, I'm going to let you lead with the first question, and then we'll follow up with some thoughts from Sue, and we'll go there. So, Brandon, the floor is yours.
All right. So let's kind of jump in here now. The three of us here on this show have been, we've been weather geeks pretty much on and off our whole lives. In fact, meteorology was my original career goal. So could you tell us a little bit about how you got to be interested in weather? If it was a single event that kind of served as the touchstone point, or if it was more gradual, and then maybe if you could just, kind of give us a brief overview of what a normal day for you is like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you can probably relate here when we kind of colloquially joke that we've been bit by the weather bug or are genetically modified to love the weather and be passionate about it from a very early age. I definitely fall into that category. I grew up north of Philadelphia, so not Tornado Alley. I was deathly afraid of thunderstorms when I was a kid, to the point where I would run inside screaming and hide under my bed covers when I was pretty little. But with that fear, I learned to also have an amazing appreciation and draw to the weather. When I was in second grade, we did a science unit that encapsulated weather 101 basically, and I loved it from that point on. And this was kind of, I'm going to date myself here, so this was mid 80s or late 80s or so, and the Weather Channel was just kind of coming into its own, and it was much more science driven than I think what you could say it is now. And exactly what you were referring to, I started seeing tornado videos, and one event that particularly captured my imagination or my desire to continue pursuing or to begin pursuing tornadoes and to love it was the Andover, Kansas tornado event that happened in the spring, in April of 1991. And that was really kind of an aha moment for me. And I just found myself going crazy over tornadoes and reading everything I could. And there was no internet, there was no YouTube. The library at school had one book on tornadoes. So I was kind of left to get Weather Channel home videos. And we had a whole collection of tornado videos, including those that you were referencing from the 80s and 90s with Dr. Bluestein in there and pointing and all kinds of fun stuff going on.
That's great.
Yeah. I forgot what the second part of your question was there.
Then you're also looking for every Encyclopedia Britannica article you can find on tornadoes.
Good point.
Yeah. And I'm still waiting for the Weather Channel to launch pro wrestling. That's when we'll know they've really jumped the shark.
Hey, don't count it out of the water yet.
Sadly, I'm not. Okay, the next part of my question was if you could just kind of give us a quick overview of what a regular day for you is like.
Oh, okay, yeah, absolutely. So in the context of storm chasing or in the context of my everyday work life, I guess I'll ask for clarification there.
How about let's go ahead and do both?
All right. So everyday work life is I actually live a little bit outside of OSU. I work from home periodically, most days that I'm not teaching. So I'll get up. I actually am a big fitness guru. So get up early, get the kids ready for school, get them on the bus, and then I do something physically active. I'll run or ride a bike or do a weightlifting routine. Come back, usually have to sift through like 50 plus emails, get that started and going, courtesy of that director of undergrad studies title you threw around there. And then usually do a little bit of teaching prep and then do research. And that research can range in, usually it's more likely than not that I'm attending to student research and working with students through their projects. But I'm also going forward with new research ideas, writing grant proposals, working on formal publications through meteorological journals, etc.
And how about the other side of the coin about storm chasing and going after that? Do you still do some of that? And what do you have time to do that? I guess I want to ask you.
I do still do storm chasing. I started chasing in 2004, and I did a lot of chasing through my graduate career. Moving to Ohio, I started my career at Ohio University, and obviously we don't have tornadoes here locally nearly as frequently as what we have in central Oklahoma. But I developed a class where I could take students out, and we did a whole experiential learning class, and that's just getting ramped up at OSU now, and basically take students out and go storm chasing and focus on looking at forecasts, on figuring out the ins and outs of tornado logistics, because it's actually really hard. Even if there are tornadoes around, it's really hard often to position yourself in a location that's just kind of perfect for when the tornado forms or when it's going on. So a typical chase day is going to look like waking up in a hotel and right away, basically like before I even get out of bed, looking at my phone, checking out the Storm Prediction Center's convective forecasts and outlooks for the day, looking at some observations, looking at radar, looking at satellite, looking at temperatures. Do we have any ongoing convection that might muddle the waters for later on in the day? Then, usually about, get ready for the day and turn back to the computer and look at the new numerical models that are coming out for the high resolution forecasts, trying to identify where am I going to go, roughly like general kind of area, and kind of have a target city in mind, and rally students, rally the other individuals who I'm with, and we start traveling out to this general area and then recalibrating along the way as we're seeing new model runs come in. At some point in time, you hope storms are going to form. Usually that happens anywhere between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the evening, and then there's a couple hours of chasing. And ideally, you're seeing something that's exciting. Sometimes you're just getting a sunburn. Sometimes you're chasing rain. And then by the end of the day, you're exhausted and looking for the nearest hotel and hopefully some kind of Subway or something that's still open at 10:30 p.m.
That's true.
For dinner.
We've always talked about the bad idea of having to stop at a 7-Eleven at 1 o'clock in the morning after you've been chasing all day, because that's guaranteed to keep you up at night.
Try a Chinese buffet at 10 p.m. It's not quite the freshest.
That's funny you mentioned that. That's a great story. It's funny because this year in Ohio, you didn't have to go too far to see tornadoes this year.
It's actually a pretty good year here.
It's been a crazy year here. So I've had people I've had friends tell me the one went through their backyard back in April. It's like, just went through the backyard. We're watching the funnel go through the backyard and going, well, that's nice. Well, how big? We live on 3 acres. Okay, so your backyard is bigger than it didn't take Jimmy's swing set with it. So no, it didn't. But but anyway, again, that's a lot of fun. And I know chasing. I know there are a couple of we know that do chase, and it's a crazy thing. But it's obviously rewarding. I guess it's worth it. You see that you get that one shot or that one funnel that gets dropped, and you go, and everyone wants to get the draw, and it's like, that is a monster, and that's everything. And that leads us talking about research. And Sue, go ahead and.
Yeah, I've been looking at
at the subject you're researching, which I think is kind of interesting, and is interesting also because it's actually something that the three of us have actually discussed on the on our podcast, and that is the effect of terrain on tornado genesis and also on tornado intensity, path, continuation. Does it have any effect at all? I mean, we've seen tornadoes go up hills. We've seen them go through downtown Miami. We've seen them go across the Mississippi River. But is there really some effect? And what has your research come up with so far?
Yeah, terrain is a really interesting problem that we have to deal with. And I will say, yes, it does definitely impact a tornado. The tricky part of the whole problem is that we don't exactly know how it's going to impact the tornado, because in some instances, using observations, at least as the tornado moves up a hill, it might intensify, and then in other instances, as it moves up the hill, it weakens. So it's unclear exactly what those details are, why it does one thing one time and another thing another time. So we think that might have to do a little bit with how complex the terrain is. Do you have just a single hill? Is it a ridge versus more of like a circular hill? Do you have a lot of hills where there's competing turbulent eddies that are going to cause potentially different interactions with the tornado and the surface winds? And also, the approach angle might have something to do with it, and how steep the hill is also appears to have something to do with it too. So I'm actually in the process right now of working with a collaborator who is a civil engineer, and she's from Missouri Science and Tech, and she has really ultra high resolution numerical models that she runs. She does it for the purposes of actually putting buildings into the models and looking at how tornado winds impact the buildings. But we're talking about resolutions on the order of like 10 centimeters or so. So we put a hill in her model, and we're looking at how that hill is going to affect the tornadoes as they're going up and over. And we have a couple different terrain configurations that we're working on, and definitely changes both the path, kind of veers things off a little bit as the tornadoes go uphill in one direction, and then downhill they kind of veer off in the other direction. So it definitely impacts tornadoes that are ongoing. As far as creating tornadoes in the first place, that is very dependent upon the overall landscape and how the overall landscape is interacting with the prevailing winds at the surface. If you have a situation where you have a valley that is oriented kind of parallel to surface winds, you can actually locally enhance the conditions that are needed for tornado formation, and you might actually end up with a tornado when you wouldn't necessarily expect to. On the converse, sometimes you have situations where the terrain actually disrupts the surface flow, and it kind of wrecks that overall positive environmental contribution, which is why, for example, like in the heart of the Appalachians or in the heart of the Rockies, we tend to not see a whole lot of tornadoes because the mountainous terrain there is just so disruptive to the surface wind flow pattern that it's hard to get anything to really materialize for at least any kind of long duration.
Right. That's a good point.
That's fascinating. It almost seems that probably not immediately, but in the future, the local weather service offices might be able to refer to the terrain when they're making their warnings and forecasts.
Yeah, that's like the pie in the sky, big picture vision.
It is. That would be incredible because, like I said, we know that bottom third or the bottom part of the storm where the rear flank downdraft comes in, undercuts the inflow and starts everything rolling. I guess it would depend on terrain as to how effective that's going to be in starting that, as it going up and bringing it down. That's actually really interesting. Yeah, it is. It is. It's funny you mentioned. I was just thinking of the 1974 super outbreak, the Gwinn, Alabama tornado went through that national forest there, and just uphill, downhill, didn't matter. That was an incredible event, and you could see it via satellite for over a year with the path through that. And now that was interesting because it was kind of a consistent path all the way through, if I remember reading that. And it seems even when you come up with these works about topography and everything, you still sometimes it's still there's always a variable somewhere. Well, yeah, I'm kind of curious if does the strength of the tornado appear to have be affected more by particular terrain? I mean, are weaker tornadoes easier to affect than like the Gwinn, Alabama tornado, which was an F5?
Yeah, that's a really good question and something that we're currently investigating right now. And the hypothesis is, yes, presumably a bigger tornado is going to be less impacted by terrain and even variations in surface roughness, as you're kind of alluding to there with the forest, than a smaller, weaker tornado. And I've seen photos actually from a weak tornado that has encountered like a grove of trees, for example, and it kind of like sputters around and it's like, how do I get over this thing? And kind of dissipates, and then it reforms on the other side of the grove of trees. So it in a physical way, it would make sense that a larger tornado with stronger winds, which has more momentum altogether, would feel the effects of terrain and variations in surface roughness, presumably a little less than what weaker, smaller tornadoes would.
That's a very good point. What about what research and the latest on supercell formation? Anything that's been noteworthy in the last couple of years that maybe you could comment on or talk about? Because of course that's where everything comes together with supercells. What kind of research has been on that you know about in the last couple of years?
So we have a really good understanding of the environments that are needed for supercell formation. As the parent storms themselves, we nail this pretty well. What we don't necessarily nail is some of the fine scale nuances within the storm, particularly related to the microphysics. So microphysics refers to precipitation and cloud processes. So we're looking at how and why does hail form? What's the distribution of that hail? How big is it? Where do you have small droplets in the storm versus larger droplets? And while that might sound sort of pedantic, those questions actually have implications on thermodynamic characteristics of the winds below. So how warm or cold the air is, how much evaporational cooling is happening. Small drops tend to evaporate more readily than larger drops do, and they can contribute more effectively to cooling the air. And that storm-generated outflow has direct implications on the storm's longevity and on the potential for tornado production. So those components are a little less understood. We're also on the cusp of doing a better job at understanding how surface roughness affects supercells. We've been looking at we've been looking at tornadoes in the context of surface roughness now for a period of time. But a colleague of mine out at Purdue, his name's Dr. Dan Dawson, and he and one of his students recently published a paper investigating how variations in surface roughness can actually affect the constraint of the outflow boundaries that are moving around the storms. And there almost appears to be this Goldilocks situation where, not enough isn't good, too much isn't good, but just in the middle is just where we need it to be for this effective balancing of the outflow, the generation of the vorticity to feed into the storm, and then perhaps ultimately produce a tornado.
Well, yeah, I think that's fascinating to me because, like you say, you hear these storms going for 5, 6, 7 hours sometimes, these very steady state supercells that just don't big swings in precipitation or anything else. They just keep cycling tornado after tornado, and they'll last and travel hundreds of miles over all kinds of terrain and not lose any of their punch at all. And we've seen several of those in the last 50 years, even back to 2011, back to 2021, what happened in Kentucky with the long track tornado there. And it's fascinating to talk about that because that steady state, it seems to feel, once it locks in, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And they just kind of are in some kind of internal balance with the environment that helps them really be sustained for a long period of time.
What do you think has been the single most significant shift in scientific thinking that you've witnessed regarding how storms work and how forecasting them is or should be approached?
So one of the biggest shifts, I guess I would say, in our understanding of how tornadoes work is really nailing down the understanding of what has to happen for a tornado to form in the first place, and the evolution of the winds that are feeding the tornado. How does that happen? So way back in the day, in the 1960s, one of the only ways that you could actually study, in a scientific sense, tornadoes was in a laboratory. So people generated wind tunnels and tornado chambers and studied tornadoes in the laboratory. And in that context, you basically create a tornado by having a fan in the ceiling or pushing up from below. So you're mechanically driving an updraft, and then you pump in air from the surface on the sides and add some kind of fins to get that air swirling. So originally we create tornadoes in this lab setting by kind of providing rotation at the ground that gets sucked upwards through this updraft. When we started having some numerical simulations of supercells and tornadoes in the late 1970s, and we started having the advance of the first Doppler radar data, we thought what we were seeing was a different process, and we were interpreting tornado formation as actually starting in sort of the base part of the cloud, or maybe even a little above the base part of the cloud, and then descending to the surface. And we thought we were seeing that in radar observations. And as I mentioned, some early models, not all of them, but some early models created this tornado through what's referred to as the dynamic pipe effect, where you create rotation in the cloud, it creates a low pressure, and then sucks air in from below, and basically converges swirling air underneath in a progressively kind of iterative manner, moving down to the surface until it forms a tornado. So for a long time, we thought tornadoes were formed, especially from supercells, through this top-down process. It turns out, once we are now into kind of the 20-teens era, using higher advanced technology, using rapid scanning radar, which is my area of expertise, tornadoes don't form from the top down. Most of them, I hesitate to say all, because it's irresponsible to generalize something like a tornado and say everything does it the same way. But most tornadoes that we are seeing form in a similar manner, where you have ground-based rotation that's present initially, and that ground-based rotation either gets sucked up by the updraft above, or it kind of converges through a deeper layer between the surface and the cloud itself. Now, our eyes actually fool us because we see the funnel cloud and we think that's the tornado. But in reality, the tornado is this swirling column of air that we are not entirely seeing, because air is invisible unless we have some kind of tracer. And the tracer for the funnel is the water vapor. But the water vapor doesn't necessarily represent what the full column of air is doing underneath it. So we've kind of seen this interesting transition from, ground-based, ground-up tornado formation in labs to, well, actually we think they're forming in the clouds first, to back to actually no, they're not. And some of the more advanced numerical simulations of supercells these days are really interesting and are posing tornado formation through a variety of different like vorticity amalgamations, where basically you have these two small little narrow tubes of rotating air that are not really the tornado, but somehow they get kind of pulled together into the like the updraft area, the interface between the downdraft and the updraft, and kind of aggregate and form tornadoes that way. So it's the jury's still out, in the sense of we haven't nailed down with 100% certainty how tornadoes form in all cases, and we also don't necessarily understand or know for sure how that ground-based rotation gets there in the first place. There are a couple different theories that exist, which may all be right or may all be wrong. And so that's another active area in terms of tornado research right now.
And that ends part one of our interview with Dr. Jenna Hauser. She is the Associate Professor of Meteorology at The Ohio State University. She also spent several years working with Dr. Howie Bluestein out of the University of Oklahoma. Hope you enjoyed the first part of the interview. The second part will be just as exciting. We'll be talking about new forecasting tools and methods that are out there that, yes, they may actually one day bring good news about tornado forecasting and watches and warnings. It's going to be good. So, we'll catch you on the next side of that. This is Truth and Talk. I'm Gary.
I'm Sue.
I'm Brandon.
And we'll see you next time.